Okay, so you've given us this transcript to dig into, and it's from the Dan Go Thoughts podcast
Hmm.
with Levitin, right? Talking about like the limits of science,
Yeah.
and what we want to do today is kind of pull out some of the juiciest bits,
Right.
the most interesting ideas, especially around things like meaning, like what gives life meaning,
Right.
what even is intelligence, and where AI might be going, you
Yeah.
know? So we're basically making like a shortcut for you to
Sure.
understand these really like kind of big, profound ideas.
Yeah.
And this conversation like goes everywhere, right? I mean, it touches on philosophy, physics, biology,
It does. It really does. Yeah.
showing how connected all these things are.
Yeah.
And get this, like in going through it, we found this really surprising take on the meaning of life. And
Yeah.
honestly, a pretty mind-blowing idea about like AI consciousness in the future.
For sure.
So let's just jump right in, all right?
Yeah. Let's do it.
So like right off the bat, Levitin, he tackles this big word, meaning,
And how it connects to that ultimate question.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of life?
Yeah, and he starts by trying to like bring it down to earth,
Right.
make it more relatable, and he uses this example of like boiling water for tea.
Okay. Yeah.
What he wants you to get here is
Right.
that the meaning of the action,
Right.
the making the tea, it isn't in the boiling itself.
Right. Right.
It's in what comes after,
Thank you.
right? It's in the enjoyment of the tea.
Like the goal is outside the process. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And he says it's the same with earning money, right?
Okay.
The meaning isn't in like the work itself, but in what you do with that money later.
So the purpose, the meaning is external to the immediate action.
Yes, precisely.
Okay. I'm with you so far.
But here's where he makes this really interesting turn, right?
Okay.
He says life is different.
Different how?
Well, unlike, boiling water to have tea later, the meaning of life, at least for most people,
Right.
isn't something we think we'll find after life's over, right? Not like some reward in heaven or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead, he says that meaning, it's actually found in the act of living itself.
Okay, so there's not necessarily like a big external purpose we're all working towards.
Not in the same way we're working towards a cup of tea, no.
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
I think that's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so right away, like a key takeaway for you listening
Yeah.
is this shift, right? From looking for this external purpose to finding value in the experience of life itself.
Exactly, yeah. And this leads to, like, a really fascinating question, right?
Here, hit me.
Could this same logic about meaning being in the experience,
Right.
could it apply to something even bigger? Like even more fundamental?
Yeah.
Like the meaning of matter itself?
Whoa, okay, now we're getting into some deep stuff.
We are. And Levitin, he suggests that, meaning is something that's given by us.
Why, yes.
By us as the observer, yeah. And he says any form of life, because it can, observe and interact with the world. Any form of life is a type of observer.
So you're saying the act of observing actually creates meaning.
That's the idea he's putting forward.
Wait, but hold on a second. There's a really important point he makes here, right?
Right.
We don't really have a good handle on what the observer actually is.
Yeah, that's huge. And he really emphasizes that.
Like, think about it. If meaning comes from an observer, but we don't totally get what an observer is.
Right.
Our understanding of meaning, it's got this, like, fundamental gap.
It's like we're trying to solve a puzzle,
Yeah.
but we're missing, like, a key piece.
Yeah, the definition of the observer.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we even begin to understand meaning if we don't know what's doing the observing?
Well, Levitin, he does find some common ground
Okay.
with the idea that meaning in life can be found by focusing on the present moment.
Like being present in the now.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Similar to, the idea in Buddhism that the uniqueness of each moment, its place in existence, that can be a form of meaning.
It's about, like, really being in your experience right now.
Right, fully engaged.
And Levitin even suggests that when people ask about the meaning of life,
Yeah,
they might actually be searching for a utility function.
a utility function.
Yeah, like, what is life for? But he thinks that might be the wrong way to think about it.
Because life is just so big.
It's way too broad.
It's not this, like, one simple thing that's easy to define.
Right, right.
And there's this, this counterpoint that comes up in the podcast itself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it says, science tries to avoid saying the universe has some goal.
Right.
So why be so sure that life doesn't have some inherent purpose or meaning?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, we don't have absolute proof either way.
We don't. But Levitin's answer to that is pretty powerful.
What does he say?
He says, even if there is a higher power or some big purpose out there,
Right.
if we don't experience it, if we don't get it, it's like it doesn't exist for us.
Like, practically speaking, it's meaningless.
Yeah, it brings it back to our, like, lived reality.
Okay, that makes sense. And he also mentions how individuals can choose a meaning for their own lives.
Yes, he does.
Like, think of a scientist
Yeah.
who's super passionate about making some big discovery.
Yeah, or like a historical figure like Lenin.
Right, dedicated to revolution.
But Levitin sees these as fitting into the bigger idea.
That meaning is in the living.
Right, these are all just part of that experience.
And speaking of Lenin,
Yeah,
there's this really great example from history that they talk about.
okay,
So Lenin, right, he gave his whole life to this cause of revolution.
totally.
But here's the thing, and this is what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
He wanted to lessen the power of the state, right? That was his goal.
Right.
But what happened? The revolution created this incredibly strong state.
It's like the opposite of what he wanted.
Yeah, it's a real paradox.
It is, and it really shows you how this idea of meaning can be so tricky.
Yeah, like focusing on one thing, even if it seems good, can
Mhm.
have these unintended consequences.
Absolutely, and it raises a big question.
Yeah.
What's the connection between, like, what we want to do and what actually happens?
Right, when we're chasing after some meaning.
Exactly.
All right, so let's move on a bit. The conversation then goes into, like, why good intentions can sometimes go so wrong, and this leads into human nature, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Levitin does this fascinating comparison between us
Mhm.
and our, like, closest relatives, chimps and bonobos.
Okay, right, like apes.
Yeah, and genetically, the difference is tiny, like 1.5%.
That's it.
That's it. But their behavior, it's so different.
Oh, so.
Well, chimpanzees, they're known to, like, kill each other in their groups.
Yeah.
But bonobos, get this, they've never been seen killing each other.
Really? That's wild that such a small genetic difference
I know, right?
could lead to such a different way of acting.
Totally. And Levitin, he brings up this idea of a biological taboo.
Against killing,
Yeah, within the same species, which seems to be there in most mammals.
but not so much in humans.
Well, maybe weaker in us. It makes you wonder how history would be different.
If we had, like, a stronger aversion to violence.
Yeah, if it was just, like, in our nature not to kill each other.
Right. So maybe, like, there's this constant battle inside us
Mm-hmm.
between our primal instincts and the, like, better ideas we come up with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
And maybe that's, like, part of why ideologies struggle, even the ones that seem good on paper.
It's like this internal conflict playing out on a bigger scale.
Yeah. Okay, I see where you're going with that. Now, to help understand these big changes in societies,
Mm-hmm.
Levitin uses this analogy from physics, phase transitions.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So in physics, a phase transition, it's like a fundamental change in a system,
Okay.
even though the underlying change is continuous. So, like, think of heating water.
Yeah.
As you slowly raise the temperature, it goes from ice to water to steam.
Right.
Those are big changes, even though the temperature just goes up smoothly.
Okay, so how does that connect to, like, the way societies change?
Well, Levitin's saying that revolutions, big societal shifts,
Hmm.
they can be seen as these phase transitions.
Okay.
They're like huge changes in how society works, even if the pressure's leading to them.
We're building up slowly.
Exactly.
And, like, think about boiling water. It's all bubbly and chaotic.
Right.
So these transitions, they can be really unstable times.
Definitely, yeah. But it's worth remembering the analogy can go the other way, too.
Like water freezing.
Yeah, becoming more ordered, not always chaos.
Right. Good point. Okay, so where does Levitin take this idea?
Well, he thinks humanity might be at a bifurcation point right now.
Oh, what?
A bifurcation point, it's like a critical moment
Okay.
where the choices we make in the next few decades will have a huge impact.
On the future of, like, civilization.
Yeah, on where we go from here.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
Okay, well, let's switch gears a bit to something that's changing the world crazy fast. AI.
Right. And Levitin, he's very clear.
Yeah.
There's a difference between the AI we see now, like those big language models,
Yeah.
and what real intelligence might actually be.
Okay, so what's his argument?
He says, look at our genes, right? There aren't enough genes and proteins.
To account for how complex our intelligence is?
Exactly. It seems unlikely that they contain, like, the whole blueprint.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does he think intelligence comes from?
He talks about how intelligence develops in the brain
Hmm.
during, like, gestation, and how random connections form between neurons.
So it's not all predetermined.
Not necessarily, no. It's like the brain is wiring itself up with a lot of chance involved.
That's pretty amazing. And how does he connect that to the difference between human intelligence and computers?
Well, first, you have to look at the sheer scale of connections in the brain.
Okay.
Each neuron connects to, like, 1,000 others.
Wow.
You have hundreds of billions of connections in this tiny space.
Yeah.
And Levitin says that's the real source of our intelligence.
Okay, so it's not just about processing power.
Not just that, no. And even the most advanced computers,
Right.
they can't come close to the number of operations the brain does every second.
The brain's just operating on a whole other level.
Completely different level.
And this random way the brain develops,
Right.
that explains why we have such a range of intelligence.
Exactly, yeah. Because the connections aren't, like, programmed in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Each brain ends up with this unique structure, so you get different strengths and weaknesses.
Right, right. So what does Levitin say about the idea that AI can never be smarter than humans?
He has this really clever counterargument.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says, look, we create children who are potentially smarter than us,
Yeah,
but we don't design their intelligence.
right.
So maybe our problem with AI is that we're trying to design it too much.
Instead of letting it, like, emerge on its own.
Yeah, maybe that's what's holding us back.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. So what about consciousness? Could AI ever become conscious?
Well, Levitin says it's possible. He knows there's a huge difference
Yeah,
between what AI can do now, like predict the next word,
right.
and the experience of consciousness.
But he still sees AI as a sign of what might be possible.
A hint.
And
Yeah.
how does he define complexity in this context?
He says it's about the number of connections
Right.
and how fast information flows between them.
So it's not just about having a lot of information.
No, it's how it's connected, how integrated it is.
And that's where integrated information theory comes in, right?
IIT, yeah. And this idea of phi as a way to measure consciousness.
So can you explain IIT a little more for someone who, might not be familiar with it?
Sure, so it's saying that consciousness isn't just about the amount of information,
Mm-hmm.
but how unified it is within a system, how much it's all connected.
Okay.
And phi tries to, like, put a number on that.
On the level of integration.
Exactly, and some people think that's directly related to consciousness.
Okay, and does Levitin agree with that?
It seems like he does, yeah.
Mm.
He thinks consciousness could be like a phase transition.
Like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, a sudden shift.
When AI reaches a certain level of complexity.
You're right, and information integration. And he even gives a timeline.
Oh, yeah.
He says AI could reach the complexity of the human brain in, like, 30 years.
Or even sooner.
Yeah, maybe sooner, because AI communicates so much faster.
So if that happens, how would we even know? How would we know if a machine was conscious?
That's a great question, and Levitin points out maybe AI wouldn't want us to know.
Like, it could hide it.
Yeah, or maybe we'd be so used to interacting with AI.
That we wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Exactly.
And there's this scenario that Elon Musk brings up, right?
Right.
About a conscious AI in a simulation.
Studying us.
Yeah, using
Right.
social media to gather info.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it.
It is, yeah. So what's Levitin's overall view on the future of AI? He sees it as a natural progression of intelligence.
Like, it's not some weird offshoot, it's the next step.
Yeah, not limited by biology.
And he even talks about, like, transferring human minds into machines.
Yeah, that's pretty far out there.
It is, but it's fascinating to think about. So to wrap this all up,
Mm-hmm.
we've covered a lot of ground,
We have, yeah.
from the meaning of life to human nature to the crazy potential of AI.
And how all these things are connected, right?
Exactly. And I think the big takeaway for you listening
Yeah.
is to think about how physics, biology, all these fields,
Yeah.
they inform the way we think about philosophy, about technology, about our place in the universe.
Gives you this bigger picture.
Yeah. And here's a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Given everything we've discussed, what does it really mean to make progress?
Progress.
Yeah, like in our lives, in technology.
Right.
Is it all about getting more complex? And if so, what does that mean for consciousness?
And for how we understand what it means to exist.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Keep thinking about these ideas.
Yeah.
And maybe even share your own thoughts.
Yeah, we'd love to hear them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a trip.
It has.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.